we're here to talk about the potential executive order that President Biden will announce uh, at 1 o'clock tentatively today. This move is being described as Biden's most aggressive unilateral move to control numbers at the border. How wise is this move he's making? Any of you guys can answer. So,
Well,
none of these questions are like pick and choose. It's just whoever wants
Sure.
to speak up on it.
I may
Uh,
go first. Ryan can comment because you could break this down in how wise is it from a policy point of view or from a political point of view. I think from a political point of view, it's extremely wise and necessary because it is an area in which President Biden is very vulnerable and not being overly political. I think Ryan would agree with me that his reelection from a policy point of view is very important because the alternative could be a disaster. So I'm glad he's doing something that, from a political point of view, can give him some greater leeway in defending his position, showing that he's doing something. I think and I'm going to be very brief, let Ryan talk about this. From a policy point of view, I'm not certain how effective one way or the other it will be, but I'll pass the mic to Ryan.
Well, you know that the toughest border immigration enforcement legislation in history was rejected twice earlier this year, and the administration doesn't see another way out, but by trying to do something by executive order. The problem with this executive order that I see, it's premised on Section INA of the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212F, which allowed the suspension of entry and imposition of restrictions by a president. The Trump administration tried to use it a couple of times, and it was challenged in courts, and he lost. So at this point, there's no real certainty that this can actually prevail by executive order without congressional action. But I believe that the administration had to do something at this point, precisely because Congress did not know anything about it when they did have a chance and an opportunity to do it. What a lot of people don't understand is that there's no open borders. There have never been open borders. The problem is that there's a law that allows anyone who is fleeing from persecution to apply for asylum in the United States. We do know that a lot of people are taking advantage of it, but they're real asylum claimants. And right now, there's not really a law that would allow us to do something to stop it, like what President Trump used under Title 42, but there's no longer a pandemic. There's nothing else we can do. So this is what he's trying now. Let's see if this section works.
Yes, and I would just add to it. I precisely because of what Ryan said. I think this is more window dressing. It gives the president the opportunity to say that yes, okay, you won't give me the legislation. I'm trying everything. I'm trying the executive action on this. I think there's a high probability that one or more U.S. district courts would enjoin that. It may never go into effect, but again, it gives him that puts him in a position saying, I'm doing everything I can. You won't give me legislation. You wanted legislation. I tried it, but then you didn't want it. Then you said I should try an executive action. I'm trying that, so I think it's good. Again, as I said to begin with, I don't think it will be very effective. And I'd just like to comment on one more point. It's always been that case that and there's a real question whether 212F can trump, pardon that word, trump the statute that does provide that if you're in the U.S., you have the right to apply for asylum. And the problem with all of that is when that legislation was enacted, no one contemplated that there could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people doing that together
at the same time.
from the system.
Well, and Ryan, you brought up something very interesting. So I'd like to hear this from both of you. As attorneys, how do you handle asylum cases? In other words, how challenging is the process of granting asylums, and how has it evolved, and what will this new move then mean for the courts?
A very low percentage of individuals that are applying for asylum in the United States actually get it. You can search for the statistics on the internet at all times. The problem is that the asylum laws of the United States do not protect everyone. And a lot of people are running away from violence. A lot of people are running away from devastating country conditions. And that is not enough to apply for asylum in the United States.
And this
Our
isn't
law,
just and this isn't just limited to Mexico. We've seen this with Syrian refugees as well, correct?
we have seen it with refugees from all over the world. But this is the problem. Some come because things are not good in my home country, and that is not enough to apply for asylum.
Mm.
You have to have been persecuted or have a reasonable fear of being persecuted based on your race, religion, and your nationality, or because you belong to a particular social group, or because of your political ideas. But if you're running away from crime or bad country conditions, that is not enough, and you're going to end up with a deportation order in the end. If there could be a way to expedite that and not a process that has been taking up to 3-point-something million cases in the courts and all of these delays, that could be a solution for the problem. But regrettably, it's really tough.
Well, and so what steps then can individuals currently in the asylum process take to protect their rights in light of this potential change?
Well,
Go ahead, Charles.
no, I was going to say, those individuals in the current system, frankly, by if they meet that very low bar of a credible fear claim and they're able to apply for asylum, they've actually won when you think about it, because they have been admitted, they're here, they can, at some point after 6 months, they can apply and obtain work authorization. Their cases may not be heard for years. And the truth is that very few of them will be actually removed from the country. So they're winning now. For people that really do have a good, strong case for asylum, who would like to get that over with, they're in the mix with everybody else. And in cases, asylum seekers are being given notice to appear, 4, 5, 6, 7 years out for their hearing. And by the way, if you have a very good case for asylum today, there's a risk in that. Let's take someone that applied from El Salvador based upon a woman because of the conditions in that country, because of the lawlessness, and that the criminal gangs controlled some part of El Salvador. They were a de facto government, and she could be subject to rape or what have you. And that was the basis of her case, more or less. Well, it's, with the passage of time, now El Salvador has a very different government. They put all these bad guys in the prison. So a person that has a good case would probably want to have that case heard before the conditions change, because for people in El Salvador, for many of them, they will not have such a strong case as they would have had if the case had been heard concurrently with the application.
I mean, I would like to add something and Charles is absolutely correct in everything he said, but there's something still of what we've read so far, of what President Biden is going to unveil later. Anybody that is denied entry and expelled can always request an appointment with the CBP-1 application and enter orderly to apply for asylum, but at a port of entry. There will be some humanitarian exceptions, including medical cases and so forth, and including minors. So I don't think that would worry immigration advocates, but still, once again, we anticipate a lot of litigation after this.
See, and I wanted to bring up something that you brought up earlier. You noticed that because Congress was not well aware of this in the past, this is him kind of acting on his own volition, but it's kind of like he hasn't really been given any choice. But what sort of repercussions can we still expect from this?
When you say repercussions in politically or legal or what have you?
Both, because I'm pretty sure legal advocates are going to try to be up in arms about this, but of course
they're already. Corning was already on TV criticizing this as a last-minute effort that is not going to resolve anything, that he's doing it just because of political ideas, and they were actually insinuating that this will benefit the cartels, because now the border is going to be closed at 2,500, so I only have 2,500 to get in, so I'm going to charge you more to put you up in the line before anybody else. So they really think this is not going to work. So if he does something, it's bad, and if he does nothing, it's bad. So I'm not really sure how this is going to play out in the end. But this is doing something and who could really actually act on it and change the law and give them all of this authority is Congress. So I really don't understand at this point, while this is still happening and this is the president has to issue executive orders when Congress could have taken care of this long time ago.
Well, and it's funny you bring this up, that he's going to have to do this on his own. Wouldn't we still need cooperation from Mexico to carry out this executive order? And so, in light of Mexico's recent election with President Sheinbaum, I've heard from the Associated Press that they've spoken on the phone, but it's unclear if they spoke about this. Is it still premature? And if so, how do we reconcile the timing for all of this?
It is premature. She has made manifestations that she will continue with her predecessors' policies. Not all, but the large majority of them. So I really believe that Mexico will be in full cooperation with the administration.
I would like to add to that. I agree, but for another reason. They understand the consequences of this election. Mexico can play, as they have recently, a very powerful role in terms of enforcement on their own southern border, enforcement near the northern border. They can play a pivotal role, and they can listen to what President Trump is saying that he's going to do if elected. And I think that they do not want to see a President Trump back in the White House. And I think they're going to cooperate with the United States because it's in their self-interest to do so. But I'd like to get back to your other question about how, how could this happen with Congress and so forth. There's a very clear explanation to all of this, and it's just pure politics. The Republicans, I know Senator Cardin, I've worked with him. I know Ted Cruz, he technically actually worked with me or worked for me. They're just sort of dancing around because they're caught in a very awkward position because of President Trump. President Trump says he doesn't want anything. He wants the problem so he can run on that in November. So they, on one hand, they demand legislation. And then when the president agrees to that, they say, no, we don't need legislation. We want an executive order. Then he says, okay, I'm going to give you the executive order. And they say, no, you should have done it earlier. It's too late. It's political. What they're really saying is, you're doing this, if you analyze this, they're saying you're doing something that's good. You think it's good for America. It will help you politically. And we don't want you to do that because we want to save this issue for the campaign.
So it sounds like this is less about humanitarian crisis and more about control.
It is a humanitarian crisis, but it's being dealt by one of our two political parties in a strictly political reasons.
I agree.
The very senior, responsible Republican member of Congress, and I don't want to embarrass him, but he told me with some degree of regret, he says, my party would rather than having a solution, they would rather have a political benefit, and they don't want a solution. They want be able to benefit politically from this issue.
So it's a humanitarian crisis, but it's being manifested through political control.
Well, I would say we have, it's not just the United States. I think in 2022, there are 5 million people that entered Europe seeking refuge. And so to some extent, this is a worldwide crisis. It is enhanced because of social media. There are influencers. You can go on YouTube, get instructions how to get to the border. You can be in Africa or Asia or anywhere. And actually, we lawyers talk about an attractive nuisance. This is very powerful. People can see that if they follow the route, they can get here, and they get here. They pass credible fear. They can get in the U.S. And once they're here, they may be here forever. So we have to deal with this. The most effective way is legislation.
Well,
I have no doubt, and there's something else that needs to be taken in consideration by the government and Mexico as well. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement for Commerce, we substituted NAFTA, expires in 2026. So this is something that definitely the Biden administration has to be looking into, working with Mexico and Canada to be able to preserve this one. But as Charles was saying, and going back to what he said, this problem with displaced individuals all over it's not only to South America and the United States, it's happening all over the world. And obviously it needs to be addressed in different ways. But I really don't believe that there's going to be a solution unless governments start working together to find the real roots of what this is really happening.
Well, on that note about governments working together, in light of SB4, which has, been boomeranged in terms of its legal and ethical use, what role might that play if it ends up becoming passed? Because even Mexico said it would not accept any repatriates.
It's not going to pass.
Hey, I'm tired of writing about the boomerang because I just want to know if I'm right or wrong.
I don't know what Charles believes, but I believe once again, this is part of the political environment that we're working on right now on election year. Texas started, all of these other states have followed with similar laws that for many years, the Supreme Court of the United States have found that was strictly for the federal government and found all the statutes unconstitutional, allowing little parts of the statutes to go forward. I don't believe, as before, will pass completely at a minimum, maybe a section of it. But definitely it's preempted by the federal government, so I don't think it's really going to affect in any way.
Yeah, of course, I agree. It's terrible policy. It would be ineffective. I do not think it will be, in the end, it will not survive court. There's a very definite Arizona case, which is Supreme Court just a few years ago found that something very similar passed by Arizona was unconstitutional because of the preemption clause. Maybe some portion of it will, but this is all. This is nothing more than a political statement. The people who are passing this, doing this, they really don't care too much about whether it survives, but they're doing this for the base. It excites them. They raise money. They can show they're being tough, and then if the courts find that it's unconstitutional, they can raise more money, saying we've got to, attack the court, better justices. So it's all politics.
Well said.
Well,
And
and it's something to test. I'm sorry, I meant to have
No, go ahead.
It is something that I also would have if I would have 5 conservative new Supreme Court judges. And it's new ways of thinking. Times change. And look at what happened with abortion after so many years in the United States. And suddenly a test ended up in a revocation that have passed, now is questioning even the ones that wanted it revoked if they did the right thing. So you'll never know what can happen and what a conservative court could actually go with. But once again, it's been many years of precedents and judicial precedents and cases where the Supreme Court and even Congress has recognized that all of these laws are preempted by the federal law, and it belongs to the federal government.
Well, and on that same note, Charles, I want to revisit something you mentioned about SB4. I want to talk about Title 42, though, which was criticized under the Trump administration, lifted under the Biden administration. What is the difference between both this new potential executive order in terms of turning away asylum seekers when it comes to Title 42 versus this move where it's just putting a number on how many people you allow to enter? Am I missing something here?
Well, first of all, as everyone says, Title 42 was a health code provision. It was an immigration provision. It essentially allowed the government to block someone from entering, although they could, 10 minutes later, they could try to enter again, 4 or 5 times during the same day. And clearly, that was based upon the pandemic. And once the head of the Center of Contagious Diseases said that there was no pandemic, it was very hard to justify Title 42. The Biden also used, the Biden administration used Title 42 for some period of time. But that's, so I think the executive order would be under the Immigration Nationality Act, 212F of the Immigration Act. So they would effectively be I don't know whether they'd be processed and removed, but it would be it would have the same effect of preventing people from entering the US at least once they hit a certain number.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the Immigration Nationality Act, because my knowledge of the Immigration Act is just 1965, um, where we saw groups of immigrants, much that looked like myself, South Asian as well as just East Asian, that were welcomed into the country. But there have also been times where we sort of stopped folks from coming in. Um, and so I'm just curious on what the legal precedent is, if you could explain it for those like myself that don't know too well. The legal precedent with the US has with respect to restricting and welcoming immigrants whenever it seems convenient for them.
I know Red has something to say about this. I'm so glad you mentioned the 65 Act. That was ultimately passed by and signed by President Lyndon Johnson. And I'm very proud of the fact that I initiated, developed a monument downtown Houston, significant, which really emphasizes there's 6 different stations. One is immigration, because it was Johnson that really opened U.S. to worldwide immigration. Before that, under the provisions that were enacted under the 24 Act, it was very restrictive. And if you're from the subcontinent, I think there was only an annual quota of 100. There was an annual quota of 100 for China.
Mhm.
Annual quota of 65,000 for the UK. So he opened that up so people could immigrate through family ties and the needs of employers. So that really changed literally the face of America. I'm old enough to know, I can remember when there was no more than 5 Chinese restaurants and only 2 Indian restaurants in Houston, and the community was very small. All of that was post 65, but that really, so I think we're dealing with a different issue, and that is even the 65 Act was restricted. To immigrate, you had to have a close family tie, or you need employer sponsorship. And the truth is, the vast majority of the people in the world could never immigrate. They didn't have the family. They did not have employment sponsorship. They were not going to make a $800,000 investment. And so filing for asylum became a very attractive way to get into the United States. And many people, for good reasons, they're fleeing poverty and crime, but that does not technically qualify you for asylum. But because we're so restrictive on one hand, people are tempted to come to the border to take advantage, just to try anything to get into the US. And they've been very successful in doing so.
What advice do you have for individuals who have family members concerned about the potential impact of this executive order on their own on their family members' immigration status or asylum claims?
If somebody's on the way to the United States to apply for asylum, do it in an orderly manner and go through a port of entry. Once again, if the border is closed, you cannot enter illegally. But if you use the orderly way that the administration has created, and you can make an appointment using and downloading the app CBP One, you will be allowed to continue applying for asylum in the United States.
Okay. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we conclude?
No, it's just a very, I often say when I hear people tell me this is so complex, so difficult, what to do, and I tell them no. What to do is pretty well understood. What the changes that we need to make. It's been pretty well discussed. There have been many various legislative proposals. We've nearly passed comprehensive immigration reform several times. That's not difficult. What is extremely difficult, and we've never been in a worse situation, is the politics that makes it very difficult. The last significant immigration legislation we passed, it was almost 40 years ago. And unfortunately, given the makeup of Congress, and I'm without being overtly political, the makeup of the Republican Party, the chances of passing any significant immigration legislation today is very remote. And I think, unfortunately, there was a time under the biggest immigration bill that passed. The 86 Immigration Reform and Control Act passed under President Reagan. It was led by a conservative Republican from the state of Wyoming, Senator Al Simpson.
And he had an amnesty.
Amnesty. That was a true amnesty. Under President George H.W. Bush, we passed the 1990 Act, increased the visa numbers, another good provision. George W. Bush, who I worked for as a senior advisor, he was extremely supportive of a broad-based comprehensive immigration bill, which would have passed but for 9/11. And today, there is no Republican leader that could even remotely talk about those things without being run out of the Republican Party. That's very sad.
We really need to learn from our mistakes in the past. We really need to move forward. We really need to find out what are the problems and why are people immigrating to the United States as they are. Look at what happened to El Salvador, as Charles was telling us earlier, and how Bukele has changed everything, and less people from El Salvador are coming. Maybe some efforts have to be addressed to some countries precisely to be able to deal with their own problems with violence and crime. But it is very important to know that we really have to change the law at some point. When families have to wait 20, 25 years to be together, when a process of bringing a family member from another country takes 3 or 4 years and families are separated, when somebody has been in the United States and his father has an emergency and they leave the country, they get a punishment that they cannot come back for 10 years, being separated from the whole family. And there's no exceptions for if children are suffering or anything like this. When we have a system that doesn't work, that is taking so long, that is so delayed, that does not respond to our time and age at this point, this is going to continue to happen. People are going to continue to try to be with their families, and people are going to try to look for the best for their future. So this will take a bigger effort to address this crisis. But these little things will make a difference. At least it's bringing everything up for conversation again, and hopefully Congress will act on a statute to resolve at least temporarily the issues.
Well said. We'll leave it there then. Thank you so much for speaking with me.